Hey True Seekers, it's Nathaniel with another deck profile. Today I will be covering my first place Hope and Faith deck. Alright. So I have Sadie as my True Seeker. She says once per turn I may search my deck for any level 1 Animo excluding Ultra and place it in my small group. This was extremely helpful because her ability helps me get around Zapper King. It helps me get around Fear Chrome Mega Plus. And I chose to run a total of 9 power cards. She makes my 10th one. And I chose to run exactly 4 Hope and 5 Faith. I had done some math for the game, and I found out that throughout the course of a game, for my combo to work, I will need exactly 4 Hope power cards and exactly 5 Faith power cards. All right? Because I will need at least 3 of them in the discard pile for my Stagnetics Preserve Faith ability. And I'm in all my Animo will discard 2, so I will be discarding at least 4, and I will need 1 left over. All right. Sadie's ability really helped out because I was able to use it to go grab my Potpourris, because it's a level 1 Animo, and use it to essentially ignore the actions of my opponent's Cinnies that were going to be bothering me that game. Alrighty. Moving her up. We're going to start with our Cinnies. I ran 1 Hippo Critter. Has the ability says, as long as this Cinny remains active, the actions of your opponent's virtuous animals have no effect. I chose to run this one because I was thinking that people were going to be using Profess Hair and Tortosaur and other animals that are going to have actions that I would like to stop. And so I figured Hippo Critter would be a good option for that. I chose to run Crasshopper because I figured my opponent would like to keep certain cards in their hand, and I could use Crasshopper to take those cards from their hand and force them to shuffle them back into their deck. I chose to use Zapper King because I've lost to Zapper King before, and Zapper King has an amazing action that says your opponent may not play any level 1 animal from their hand into their small group next turn. It's really strong. Partner up with him, I have a Venomoth. Venomoth is a new Cinny that has the ability, so as long as this card is active, your opponent's animal may not be activated in the same turn they are added to or grown in their small group. So these guys are like a double hit combo. Venomoth is a little bit more potent because he's as an ability, and there isn't like a one-stop shop like Potpourris to stop that. That can just blanket the entire game. So I prefer to use Venomoth. However, I found out that my Cinnies didn't actually matter a whole lot, except for certain games where they did, just to contradict myself. I also chose to use Waspits. Waspits has the action that says, when this Cinny is revealed, select 1 card from your opponent's discard pile, set it aside, and it may not be returned for the duration of the game. I chose Waspits because I figured people would be running 1 Flow Ultra and that they would be recycling it every turn. And so to prevent them from recycling, I figured I could use Waspits, but I was wrong. People ran 3 Flow Ultras in their deck and just chose not to use all the powerful Ultras that came out in Fearless. They just stuck with their Flow Ultra. So I was just wrong in this. I was wrong in this theory. Venomoth and Zapper King did their jobs very well. Crasshopper didn't perform as well as I hoped. However, Venomoth Mega performed very well. He has the action that says your opponent might activate any level 1 Animo on their next turn. Lorkai Mega didn't do what I wanted him to do because he can't take out Potpourris because Potpourris just ignores actions. This says select 1 Animo from your opponent's small group and flip it over. As long as the Cinny is active, that Animo may not be interacted with in any way. And Fear Chrome Mega Plus, who actually did win me games. Because his action says your opponent might play any cards from their hand on their next turn. So I found out that Cinnies didn't really matter, Megas didn't really matter because of Giant Killer and Paused Maws and Potpourris. All of these 3 cards really just said Cinnies don't matter. Also, my last opponent, Ethan, he ran Agape Sword level 2, and Agape Sword level 2 does not specify that the weakness has to be Agape Sword level 2. It says the weakness is Agape Sword. So he'd play Agape Sword level 2 and Agape Sword level 1, and quote the Bible verse on Agape Sword level 1, defeat the Cinny, then grow his level 1, and then activate one of his level 2s. The next turn I played a Cinny on him, he used his other Agape Sword level 2. Meanwhile, all the time having Potpourris from cross trainers to love one out that ignores actions. So, other than the fact that my Cinnies were big sometimes, and sometimes the Venomouse mattered, the Cinnies didn't really affect the game too much, which is why I wanted to cover them first. Okay. Next up, we got our equipment. I have 2 Pulse Chains and 1 Scarlet Cord. Pulse Chains, it lets me search my deck for up to 2 level 1 Animos and place them into my small group. And the Animo to whom this card is attached to cannot be activated, but can be discarded at any time. Scarlet Cord lets me attach it to an Animo and discard Scarlet Cord to either return that Animo to my hand, or discard that Animo. But if I discard that Animo, I get to search my deck for an Animo with a virtue point value that is equal to or less than that Animo, and then add to my hand. So these cards I would use to get rid of Animos in my small group. Typically, I would run 3 Pulse Chains because they just straight up search. However, Scarlet Cord's ability to replay the Animo that I'm removing from the small group did have its benefits, which is why I did a 2-1 split. Okay. Next up is the story cards. 2 Runaways. Runaways were basically there to help me recycle my Animo, get them back to my hand, mostly grab back my Flow Ultra. Next up, I had 3 Hidden Treasures. I chose to run Hidden Treasures over fishing nets, or not fishing nets, but the Rich Fool, because it says it has me place 1 card from my hand on the bottom of my deck. If I do, I get to draw 3 cards. Sometimes I would draw into Animo I need in my deck to grab with Professor, and so I would use Hidden Treasure to put those Animo back while giving myself some draw power in addition to. Next up, I have my story cards that affect Cinnies. Pawsmaw says my opponent can't play a Cinny on me next turn. Beautiful Gate says I can remove a hindrance card from an active Cinny, or I can ignore the effects from the active Cinny's ability for the turn, which is how I got around abilities. However, the one game I needed to see this, when my opponent played a Venomouse on me, I could not draw into it. It was sad. And I got Giant Killer, which says choose one of the following. Search your deck for a Mega Cinny and reveal it to your opponent. And this can only be done if your opponent isn't already facing a Cinny. Or, number 2, if you are facing a Mega Cinny, return it to the owner and have them shuffle back into the deck. These 2 cards are why Cinnies didn't matter. This card made so abilities didn't matter or hindrance didn't matter, and I just wanted to have it as a tech card just in case I needed it. And then on top of that, we have Potpourris. Potpourris has the ability, as long as this card's in your small group, ignore any effects from actions of any Cinnies revealed to you. And I would use Sadie to grab this card most games because I would get a Fear Crow Mega Plus or Zapper King, which both those are really powerful Cinny actions, and Potpourris can ignore them. All right. And then continuing with our Love Animo, I ran 3 Servitude for draw power and 1 Flow Ultra. And this is actually the card that we got for participating in the online tournament. It has the swap errata on it. So you can swap 1 time, which says you can discard this card from your small group. If you do, search your deck for any 3 Animo, reveal them, and place them in your hand. This card was absolutely essential to my strategy because it got me all the cards I needed, and it says any 3 Animos, so it could also grab Cinnies. Okay? And then, of course, 3 Servitudes says once per turn you may draw 1 card for each Faith, Hope, and Holy Spirit Animo in your small group. I do want to note that I chose not to run Prayer, because Prayer would make both of these work and would also enable me to activate these. But I specifically chose not to go that route because I needed power cards I can specifically grab with the Animo that I can use to grab them. So moving on to that idea, I ran 3 Schwimmers. Schwimmer was one of the Animo I would grab on my first turn with Sadie, because it has the action to search my deck for a standard power card and place it directly in my power pool. Now, because it cost Hope, Sadie's Hope, so I already have the power needed to activate Swimmer. I also ran 2 Glimmers because of the Fellowship bonus. Glimmer helped me clean up gains in... I can get like anywhere from 50 to 60 points in a single turn, and I still need 77 to win. So Glimmer was helping me with that fellowship bonus get there. I also ran 3 Hightails. Hightail was also filling one of the draw story card slots in this deck. It has the ability of retreat ×1. Says you can, if this card's in your hand, you may choose to reveal it to your opponent, shuffle it back in your deck, and if I do, draw 3 cards. And I wanted to see this card a lot, so I kept doing that about every turn. Oinkum is a 2 for 7, not that great value, but we're running him to grow him in an Oinkum level 2. This is a strategy that we used for last year's online tournament, because we would use him to go grab our power cards. So what we would do is we would actually, last year, use Armor and Ultra to discard power cards from our power pool, and then we would activate Oinkum to add power cards back into our power pool. So that way we can shuffle those back into our deck with Professor and grab Animo that we can activate, like Stagnetic. Which is actually what I did with this deck as well, except I was also using the new Stagnetic, which has Endurance. Alright, so that's all our Hope Animo. Professor has been a boss for us. I am glad they do have a hollow version of him that came out in the Cross Trainers reprint. I just haven't bothered putting the hollow ones in this deck, which I should probably start doing. Next up, I have 2 Sparcube. Okay. Sparcube is a 1 for 3 or a 1 for 5. He helped me clean up games. He also is the weakness of a very powerful Cine, and this is one of my favorite Bible verses, but I am probably not going to memorize that in the middle of a tournament. Then we got True Blue. Okay, True Blue. He has a swap ability. He's been errated. And his errata basically says swap. So I can't use him and Flow Ultra in the same turn, because swap is a once per turn ability across all cards that have swap. Its ability says this card's in your small group. You can swap with a level 1 Virtuous Animo in your discard pile, excluding Ultra Animo. So I would use him to swap and go grab back my Stagnetics or whatever level 1 I needed at the time. Next up, I have 3 Hoofits. Hoofit was essential because I didn't want to ever deck out, and there were discard strategies in Cines now, and plus Giant Sword's a thing, and so I didn't want to face Giant Sword, so instead I would use Hoofit, so that way I can shuffle my cards back into my deck that I would need to. Plus, there are certain cards I need in my deck in order for my combo to go off, so I would keep using Hoofit, so that way my deck never just ran thin, and I just ran out of steam. Alright, next up we're going to be talking about the new Stagnetic. Boom. So the Stagnetic has Endurance as an action. It says instantly earn 5 virtue points if you have 20 or fewer cards in your deck, and an additional 5 virtue points if you have 10 or fewer cards in your deck. So the way this would work is that I would use him to discard Faith Power cards, so that way I would have enough to use this Stagnetic's Preserve Faith ability. However, the thing about him is that he's a 2 for 8, which is good value for a level 1. But he could become a 2 for 13, which is better value, or a 2 for 18, just depending on how many cards I had left in my deck. And that came in handy quite a bit. However, when I pulled off my combo, I would typically just get 50 points, and then I'd have to follow up with some cleanup strategies just to get the rest of my points. And then I mentioned that I had this Stagnetic, which has Preserve Faith ability that says if there are at least 3 Faith Power cards in your discard pile, this card has no activation cost. So I'm going to activate one of these once per turn. I would try to keep him in my deck for as long as possible. I would use my Professor to grab a Schwimmer and grab him to tidy up, which was really helpful. And then finally, I have 2 Hoofit Ultras. So the reason why I have 2 Hoofit Ultras is because they are a 2 for 13 and they have an ability. So I would actually use one of these for its ability, and I would use the other one to activate it for a 2 for 13. Its ability says, if this card's in your hand, you may choose to discard it. If you do, search your deck for 2 Faith Powers and add them to your power pool. So essentially, I would spend the game in 3 stages. 1, set up, get my story card, or get my power cards in my power pool. And then I would get my 4 Animo into my small group. All right, and so what I would do is I would actually need to get 1 Hoofit, 1 Stagnetic. I would need to get a Professor and an Oinkum. This was my goal, is to get this with very specific power cards in my power pool. All right. And so what I would do is I would start off by activating Hoofit Ultra, and that would discard 2 of my power cards, open up the space for 2. So then I would go ahead and I would activate Oinkum to get me back 2 Hope to fill in the space for this. I would then activate Profess Hair to shuffle these 2 back into my deck. And then Professor would go grab me 2 Animo, which would be this Schwimmer and this Stagnetic. I would then activate this Schwimmer to grab me 1 Faith Power card, so then I would have 2 Faith Power cards left that I would then activate this guy with, discarding those 2. So now since I have a total of 4 Faith Power cards in my discard pile, I would activate Stagnetic, and that would give me a total of 50 points. However, that could change to 55 if I had 20 or fewer cards in deck, or it could change to 60 if I had 10 or fewer cards in deck. Normally, the biggest that he would get is a 13, so the biggest that I would get is like a 55 during the tournament, but there is a lot of draw power in this deck, and the goal is to thin out my deck. However, I would run into situations where I would want more cards in my deck, and I would keep shuffling them back, preventing me from getting the total of 18 from his endurance. So, anyways, that was the strategy of this deck, and this has been my first place online tournament Sadie, Hope, and Faith deck. So in the meantime, True Seekers, keep learning virtues and defeating Sinnies.